Hello, and thank you for joining us for another episode of This Week in AML. I'm John Byrne, Chair of the AMLRS Advisory Board.
And I'm Elliot Berman, our Creative Director. We are excited to welcome you to the This Week in AML podcast,
where we explore key news and developments in the global financial crime prevention community.
Hello, John. How are you today?
Good morning, Elliot. How are things?
Good. It was, so you're here in Milwaukee this week, and we had dinner earlier in the week. It was nice to see you in person.
Yep, same here. It was great. Great catching up. It's good, and it's not as cold the past couple of days. So I really appreciate it when you guys churn it up to 35 degrees.
That's true. You can go outside running and not have to put 6 layers on. So
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So this week, while you've been here in Milwaukee and we've been working away, a number of things have come out of both one of the Senate committees and DHS, some remarks that have to do with terrorism and particularly how national security and Homeland Security come together and domestic terrorism and how we can get better. One was that DHS Secretary Mayorkas gave a speech at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, and the other was that the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee issued a long report. It was actually the majority staff. I wonder if you saw those items.
Right. And as we mentioned last week, briefly, we said Homeland Security had issued a new bulletin that focuses on extremism in terms of risk. So yeah, I did see that, and I thought it was interesting. I know you looked at what the secretary said, because Homeland Security is obviously one of the center points of this, besides obviously FBI and the other law enforcement agencies. But he did mention a bunch of things in his presentation, and I think one did focus on the issue we continue to grapple with, and that's domestic terrorism.
Yes, he talked a lot about the challenges of the evolution of DHS, which was formed in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, bringing, as you know, many agencies together that had been in other parts of government and expanding certain roles. He talked a lot about, and I think that it's a good thing to talk about, the importance of partnerships, both international partnerships with our allies, as well as partnerships within government and partnerships between government and the private sector, something you and I have talked about a lot on this podcast and in other venues. And then he talked about some of the challenges of cyber attacks and the fact that they're borderless, which you and I have also talked about, and how to manage all of these things on a day-to-day basis.
Right. Yeah. And going back to the Senate committee report, it's over the course of several years that they put this together. There's some criticism in there, but there's findings of fact, there's recommendations. It's close to 130 pages. So there's a lot of good information in there for our community. But a couple of the things that they highlighted in terms of domestic terrorism, no surprise, because we've seen this in other data releases before this, and that's that domestic terrorism surpasses international terrorism as the most significant threat, certainly since 2015. White supremacist extremists pose the primary threat. The Homeland Security said that data that shows that white supremacists are responsible for 51 out of 169 domestic terrorist attacks for the past decade, and also that they do focus quite a bit on the inspiration that these terrorists get from social media. So there's a lot in there which isn't directly relevant. It's all relevant to us, but I mean, it's not directly relevant to financial institutions specifically, but I think that's interesting. And a series of statements regarding how the agencies respond. And so there is some criticism. They do acknowledge that DHS back in 2019 said that white supremacist violence is a major threat, and that was the first time that was identified. They do talk about, since 9/11, many laws were changed, obviously, to deal with certain issues. So they mentioned that. But they also say that DHS and FBI have not, in their words, fully complied with requirements of federal law to collect and report data on domestic terrorist attacks. Now, again, you and I have no idea what's the scope of that, but obviously the committee believes that's problematic. And so you'll see in the recommendations more push toward analyzing and collecting data. They also talk about, again, that agencies can and do monitor social media for threats of domestic terrorism, but obviously you have to be careful because of the First Amendment, Privacy Act, and those sorts of things. So a lot of that, right now, I don't think we should focus so much on the social media. People can take a look at that, but I do think that warrants your attention as well. And I'll just say that some of the recommendations we've heard before, but I think it gets a little greater weight when a committee issues them. And that's, they want a top-down review of how do you handle counterterrorism at the federal level. And I think that's probably a good thing, because 9/11 told us to do one sort of focus, or maybe a couple, but what's happened in the past, 5 to 10 years is another. So I thought that was interesting. And the last thing I'll mention and turn it back to you is, in terms of DHS, they say they should get a counterterrorism coordinator there. It'll be interesting to see the response, because I don't think we saw a response to this report from the agencies, because typically, like when the GAO issues a report, the back of it has, here's what the agency said in response. I didn't see that. So it may exist, and maybe in future conversations we could find that out. But having a coordinator, it's not just a title. I think it shows a resource focus, and it sounds like what the secretary said the other day, that should be, as they say, a no-brainer.
Yes, there clearly was one of the consistent themes in the committee report, committee staff report, was the fact that post 9/11 anti-terrorism resources were heavily focused internationally, which, given what had just happened, made sense. But with the shift, as you pointed out, over the last 5 to 10 years, or at least the recognition of the shift over the last 5 to 10 years, that there is a significant risk, and now by some agencies' analysis, the biggest risk is domestic terrorism, that efforts, resources, focus need to be aligned to take that into account. And it struck me in reading those parts of the report that that's essentially the risk assessment process that our audience members go through all the time. You take a look at what are the risks. You try to give them relative weights. You figure out how you're mitigating them, whether it's through processes or systems, or deciding not to go in that space. And then with what's left, you figure out how to allocate the resources you have to the biggest risks. And I think one of the statements in the report is that we haven't made that shift in allocating resources to what is now being recognized as the biggest risk. That doesn't mean that we stopped looking internationally. I don't think the report in any way says that. But it's a more complicated world. We know that every day, and we have to take into account those additional complications. And in this case, it's ideally getting more resources, but it's also taking what you have and figuring out how to allocate it to make sure that you're not under allocating to the biggest risk.
Right. And, going back to the data, there's a lot in the recommendations regarding doing better categories of data, making sure that they are, quote, relevant, unquote, which I'm sure means updating the different definitions. And then if you go back to the secretary's speech, it's not a direct response to the report, obviously, but he does mention quite a bit that DHS is playing a critical role in terms of counterterrorism, but also working with new technologies, making sure they have the tools they need, but also, as you say, collaborate with the private sector. So, the more ways you can identify solutions, you can deal with a lot of what the committee suggests slightly are critiques that perhaps the government can do better. So I think there is some connection between the two, the report and the speech. But again, I'm looking forward, and we could actually talk to some of our colleagues and friends in law enforcement and see if there's been an official response. In fact, we have an event this week in DC for the local ACAMS chapter where I'll be interviewing Daniel Lindholm from House Financial Services. And I'll ask her specifically about this in terms of oversight from Congress. And so we'll let you know what we find out.
That sounds good. So what's in the pipeline besides our weekly chat?
So next week, the 15th, 1 o'clock Eastern time, we're going to be doing an interview, a conversation with two investigative journalists on the broad category of corruption, but specifically on some of the both the cases they've worked on, some of the investigations. So I'm really excited about that. We also have just recently posted an interview I was able to do with Deborah LaPrevat, former FBI investigator, who has done a lot of work in dealing with kleptocracy. So that's also available. And then, we're, as you know, because you're spearheading it, we're working on our programs for 2023, and more to come on that as we have the topics, identify the panelists, and look for that on our website.
And John and I will post a new edition of This Week in AML next week. And then as we come into the holidays, we'll do a couple of archived sessions, and then we'll be back live in January. So one more live one, and then a couple of archives, and then fresh material in 2023. So John, travel safely back to Washington, and I will talk to you next week.
Take care, Elliot. See ya.
Bye-bye.